I am personally opposed to this proposal for 3 reasons. Number one, I don't believe we know how much this is going to cost, and I will go into this further later. I also, as was pointed out last week, I believe there are infrastructure deficiencies and support deficiencies in every school that have not been addressed. And I think it's going to cause a huge problem that we really need to iron out before we jump into what the legislature has asked us to do. And then finally, I want to talk about the effectiveness of online education. And I think that is something no one is clear about, and it's something that very much concerns me as an educator. So go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll talk about cost to begin with. Now, I want to tell you the truth. I am not an expert in how much computers are going to cost. But when I look at this legislation, I realize that the people who have written it are not experts on how much it's going to cost either. And we do not know. It does not spell out an exact dollar figure in the legislation. It just says things like, oh, don't worry about it. The state will take care of replacing and repairing computers. So I got online and I looked for companies that actually do this for a living. Network Alliance is a company that sets up computer networks for other businesses, guarantees that those computer networks will work, will stay up, will not break down, will have enough capacity to handle all the information that they want to handle. And I found this on the Network Alliance website talking about costs. Now I want you to just listen to the very first sentence. Remember that the initial purchase is just a fraction of the total cost of ownership, which means that a $1,000 personal computer could actually cost more than $15,000 over its 3-year lifespan. Now, when I think about giving every single high school kid a computer, I pray that these experts are wrong. Because not as an educator, but as a taxpayer, I don't want to be put in a position where I'm going to have to pay $15,000 for a student to use a computer for 3 years. And like I said, this very much concerns me. And last week, I know that Mrs. Otter spoke about Maine. And she said how Maine is doing this and how it's working so well for Maine. So I was curious, well, how much is Maine spending to do this? Can you go to the next slide? I don't know if I even have to say anything. Maine is spending $15,600 per student. Idaho is spending $8,200. And this is an adjusted amount. The $8,200 is what it would cost to do this in Maine. We do not spend that much. We're spending about $7,200. But because it's adjusted, it's more expensive in Maine, it goes up. But do you see why I am concerned about trying to do this? I don't think the Idaho taxpayers are ready to bump the education budget up to the amount that is being done in Maine. Finally, or the other thing that came up last week is the infrastructure support deficiencies. Can you go to the next slide? Blackfoot High School, the Blackfoot School District, has 3 people, 3 full-time employees in their IT department. If you were to go to the technology center and ask those people how swamped they are already, and then ask them if they believe it is possible for them to handle an additional 1,000 computers that would be handled by every single student at the Blackfoot High School. They're going to tell you they are already so busy that there's no chance they can do that. Now, the state says they're going to be responsible for the maintenance. They're going to be responsible for the upkeep. But in reality, who's going to be doing that? It's going to be the Blackfoot High School IT department. That is a very big concern for me. Are we going to end up hiring 10, 20, 30 people to keep these computers operating? This is a question that has not been answered in the legislation. It is so vague. No one knows where this is going to come from, where the money is going to come from, where it's going to be spent, who's going to take responsibility for what. And I think it's a huge concern for me. And then, again, I'm not a computer expert. But when a computer system is operating and exchanging information, it only has a finite amount of capacity to do that. If you overload that system by putting too many computers on it, too much information trying to be exchanged at the same time, it shuts down the system. On registration day, go ask what happened to the teachers at Blackfoot High School. When they were trying to register kids for classes, the administration of the school had to walk around and ask all the teachers to turn off their computer because their system was being overloaded. Now, I know last week when someone brought up a question about these deficiencies, I don't think I heard a definitive answer about how that was going to be dealt with. And so I wanted to bring it up again today because this is also a major concern. I think we are trying to jump ahead. We think we can just give every single kid a computer and everything's going to be great. But again, not being an expert, as most of us are not, we don't realize that there is a lot of other stuff that needs to be taken care of before we can do this type of thing. So those are my concerns with that. Then the next thing I'd like to talk about is the online requirement. As you know, part of the legislation requires kids to take online classes. Now I want to state that again. It requires kids to take online classes. You have to take 2 online courses to graduate from high school. Can you go to the next slide? I tried to find information about how the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, which is our online school in the state of Idaho, I tried to find how our students are doing. I could not find that information. Either the State Department hasn't collected it, or it hasn't been let out to us. But I did look, again, online, and I tried to find what state in the nation is doing the most online education. What I could find, now I might be wrong, there might be another state doing more, but what I could find was the state of Minnesota. They have 24 online schools. We have 1. The state legislature in Minnesota became concerned. They wanted to know how well those schools were doing because they're spending a lot of money on those schools. So they did a study. How many kids start an online class and actually finish it? Well, they found that only 63% of the kids who started an online class actually finished it. And I want you guys to remember, in Minnesota, these are kids who are choosing to take online classes. These are not kids who are being forced to take online classes. I personally believe if you're forcing kids to take it, the number of kids who are not going to finish those courses is going to increase even more. Now, I want you to understand something. When you, as a taxpayer, pay for an online course, you pay for it when the student starts, not when the student finishes. So as a taxpayer, 37% of the students who you paid for to take a course end up not earning that credit. Well, what do they have to do? They have to take it again. And who pays for that? It's again the taxpayer. To me, that's a little bit of a concern. Right? Especially because these are kids who are choosing to do it. And then I asked myself, well, how effective are online classes? Are online classes as good as in-person classes? Because as an educator, I personally don't think there are. But you know what? I don't really have statistics to back that up until I read about what Minnesota found with their online students. Take a look at the next thing. Only 16% of online students taking math in an online high school were able to pass the state test. If we had 16% at Blackfoot High School passing the test, people would be clamoring to close the school down. It's not acceptable. That level is way too low. But the taxpayers are paying for it in Minnesota. And if we are required to do it here in Idaho, how well do you think our students are going to be able to do? And then finally, and this really disturbed me because I work at an alternative high school, our goal is to get kids to graduate from high school. When we start the year, we have seniors. If we had 25% of them dropping out in their final year, we would be having meetings every day trying to figure out how we could change that. Yet in the online schools in Minnesota, 1/4, which is 25% of those kids actually dropped out of high school. Now, in my mind, requiring students to take online classes is just going to be a waste of our money. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that that should not be an option. It should be an option. I've talked to students who have been successful on online courses, but I tell you, I've talked to a huge number of students who have not been successful in online classes. So, let's go ahead and do the next slide. I want to give you a couple of quick final thoughts about Prop 3. And I'm going to say something now that I think may be the most important thing that I want you to hear about Proposition 3. People get their foundational skills at the elementary school level. Education reform should concentrate on improving our elementary schools. This proposal does exactly the opposite of that. Now, I know that it has been stated over and over, we're not trying to replace teachers with computers. We're not trying to replace teachers with computers. But you need to understand that there is a finite amount of money available for education. And when you take a huge chunk of that money and you concentrate it into the high school level, and you concentrate it into technology, the only way to make up that money is to cut in other areas. This legislation increased the number of kids in every elementary school classroom in the state. There are horror stories about teachers whose classroom sizes have jumped from the mid-20s to the mid-30s. I want to ask you, how do you think children in 4th or 3rd or 2nd grade who have 35 students in a class are going to do on their standardized tests? You are going to be babysitting, not teaching, in a classroom like that. And I want you to think about it. What we are doing is taking the resources away from other areas of education. And that is happening today. Ask elementary school teachers what has happened to their class sizes. Okay? So I want you to know, I am not opposed to technology in the classroom. Technology is a great tool. I would love to have more of it. I just question whether we need to have one computer for every single student, and whether we as a state can afford to do it. And I question whether we are concentrating our reform efforts in the wrong area. I really think we need to be thinking about elementary school more than we do high school.